Hello and welcome to another episode of Finders Keepers, the podcast that helps you find the best keepers for your keeper and dynasty leagues. I'm your host Jordox, and this week I'm taking a look at the engine room of your fantasy sides, the midfield. Like on last week's episode where I revealed my top 30 defenders most likely to be available in your keeper league redrafts, I will be again going through a list of 30, but this time it'll be midfielders that I think you should be targeting. The midfield is the most important position in fantasy sides, as it's where the majority of your scoring will be generated from, due to the types of players available and the fact that most leagues will have more midfielders on field than in any other position. Here on Finders Keepers, I am basing my rankings on a 30-player squad, which keeps 15 players every year and has an on-field formation of 5 defenders, 7 midfielders, 1 ruck, and 5 forwards. The criteria I'm using is any midfielder who averaged under 80 in season 2025, and I'm not including new players to the league. If you want to know the best players to target from the crop of draftees new to the league, go check out episode 1 of this preseason and listen to draft expert Dylan Alexander reveal his top 10. Now, there are a bunch of midfielders who averaged less than 80 last season, but I have not included them in this list, simply because I don't think there's much of a chance, or any chance, any of them would actually be sitting unowned in your leagues. And if by chance they are, well, my advice would be to scoop them up immediately. I'll run through those names after my 30, and then I'll answer some questions sent in on X to close out the episode. All right, so here we go. My top 30 midfielders likely to be available. Number 1, Josh Ward from Hawthorn. Had a much better season, 2025. 24 it was a bit of a backwards year for him, but much better last year. He's still only 22, averaged 76, and I think the most important thing with Ward was the centre bounces. He was at 44% of them in 2025, which was a career high. Played every game after missing opening round, and I think the Hawthorn midfield particularly needs someone to step up. They've lost Warple. Unfortunately, they've now lost Will Day for at least half of 2026. And as we know, Zach Merritt stayed in the red and black. So there's going to be opportunities, and I think Hawthorn need to just give Ward a full crack on the inside. No more time on the wing, no more time on the outside. Give him a chance at being centre bounce guy and see what he can do, because I think a big breakout's coming, and it's going to be great reward for those who've held him. But if he's sitting there in your pools, now's the time to jump on him. Number 2 is Sam Durham for Essendon. He's a couple of years older, and he's been he's been building nicely for a few years. Very consistent scorer, averaged 78 last season, after 83 the season before. So he did go down by about 5 points, but I feel like they used him a bit forward at times. I mean, the whole Essendon side was all over the place with the injuries, and they were moving players around a lot. But I think there's a spot, a bit like Ward, he's a bit similar to Ward. I think there's a spot in that midfield for him. And yeah, I think this is a great year for him to... I mean, he went at 83 season before, so I can see him getting all the way up to 90s if he can hold that spot in the midfield, and another year of development. He's great to watch. Good player. Number 3, Dan Curtin at Adelaide. And I must confess, I had him at number 1, but that recent dislocated knee has meant he'll miss at least the first 7 weeks of this season. And I think that's just enough to push Ward and Durham ahead of him in the right here, right now. But certainly long term, and as an Adelaide fan, I'm very excited about what Curtin can do. I mean, that second half of his year last year was just outstanding. Playing on the wing, and really just making a nuisance of himself to the opposition up and down the field with his big marking. And, the great thing about Curtin as a hulking-sized winger is he can then go into the forward 50 and provide a target, and all of a sudden the winger he's matched up on is, completely undersized and will be outmarked. Now, he was training the house down as a midfielder this pre-season. It looked like the Crows were going to release him on the ball, and he's hurt his knee. So I still think he's going to be a awesome midfielder for the Crows and fantasy. And I think that there's just a chance he would have been put back into the pool, because as good as his season was, that back half of the year, he did lose forward status, which, might have been enough for some to let him go. And now with this injury, you're probably even more of a chance of snapping him up. So I would be doing that. And just know, he might not have that big breakout now as he recovers from his knee, but 2027, he's going to be huge. Number 4 is James Rowbottom at Sydney. He averaged 78, 79 last year, which was a bit of a lower one for him. He's been pretty consistent for a number of years now as a pretty solid 80, 85 guy. Gets a lot of points from his tackling, plays on the ball. He's someone I've kind of waited to go to another level in fantasy, but he hasn't. And the last 4 games of the season, his centre bounce attendance has dropped. So I don't know if they had him a bit more forward. I saw he hit the scoreboard a bit, so maybe he was a bit more forward. But I think his place is in the midfield, and if he's available, he's a pretty safe 80 to 85 averaging guy who, on his day when he gets those big tackle numbers can put up a really big score. And he's only 25 years old, so he's a pretty awesome target, I think, for a keeper league. Number 5 is another Crow, James Peatling. He's also 25. Had a pretty decent first season with the Crows. He played 21 games after only managing 42 games in his 4 years at the Giants. So for the first time really became a regular in the side. And he averaged 78, which was actually kind of more than I thought. I felt like he was a bit disappointing fantasy-wise. And I think that's probably because of some real low-end scores he had in the back half of the year. And like his teammate, Curtin, who I mentioned before, he's probably only on this list because he lost forward status. So being a mid only this year makes him a little bit less valuable. But I reckon he can go to another level in his second year at the Crows. And I wonder if they use him a bit more in the middle. He was around 50% centre bounces, so it's a fair bit, but I wonder if he gets a bit more of it this season and we see... Look, he just needs to get those real low scores out of his game, and he'll be able to get over 85 average easy. So, pretty bullish on what he can do in 2026. Number 6 is Ned Long. He had a great breakout for Collingwood, and he's something that, the Pies really need to continue to develop, and that's youth. 22 years old, and in the end, when Tom Mitchell was fit and ready to play in the back half of the year, it really did become a case of Long or Mitchell, and I thought it just spoke volumes of how Collingwood feel about Ned Long, that it was Long who won out the spot, and Mitchell's no longer with the club. I mean, that's aging, but a Brownlow medalist still. And I just think Long was great. I mean, once he got in and he held that spot, he was very consistent, averaged 77, and I think he's just getting started. He doesn't play for a very fantasy-friendly side, as we know, Collingwood, and he's probably going to be capped at about a 90 average at best, probably, with this type of player, midfielder he is, but at that age, he's a great get if he's available. Number 7, James Worpel for Geelong now. So he made the move from Hawks to Cats. And the thing about Worpel, I've been big on him for years, is, he's still only 26. He averaged 74 last year, but I know he had some games where he was a sub and then he was left out at times. But this is a guy who 2 seasons ago averaged, mid 80s, I think it was. And back at the start of his career, a long time ago now, 2019, he averaged 97. So, yeah, nearly 100. So do I see him getting to 100 average? Oh, probably not. I mean, there's a couple of other Geelong mids who I think will be taking the lion's share once again in Bailey Smith, Max Holmes. But the thing about Worpel, he's actually 27, by the way. He was 26 when I wrote this list, and he's since had a birthday, I guess. Anyway, 27. The thing I like about him going to Geelong is I don't know if he would if he wasn't pretty sure of a spot. And being a clearance guy, I don't see him moving to any other part of the ground. And yeah, I just think a guy like that, if he plays every game on the ball down at Geelong, he's going to get that average over 80, and who knows how high he can get it to, because he should only be in his prime now. And I've got his ex-teammate Cam McKenzie at number 8, so another Hawk, similar to Ward. High draft pick, has been there a few years now. I think we're all waiting to see something, and the opportunity is there. Just like I said with Ward, you've got Will Day's injury, James Worpel's departure, and the need for midfielders to develop and improve for Hawthorn. He's entering his 4th year. He only averaged 62, 63 last year. He did pick up 30 touches in a game, which I thought was a bit of a surprise when I was looking into him. I don't recall that at the time, but yeah, against the Giants, he had 30 touches. So McKenzie, he just needs opportunity. He needs games in him, and I think there's a fantasy player in there. It's just whether they give it to him in year 4 or we continue to see him, floating on the outside, on the wings a bit more. But 21 years of age, this is it. Big chance for him, and I think he'll improve greatly this year. Number 10 is former Rising Star winner Ollie Dempsey for Geelong. Another one of those guys who has lost defender or forward status, and at first seems like he's not got the same value, and he doesn't. But Dempsey, he's only 23. He averaged 73. In fact, he's averaged 73, around 73, 2 years in a row now. And they're the first 2 years he's been a regular in the side. So this will be season number 5. Seasons 1 and 2, he only played a handful of games. Seasons 3 and 4, he played, I think, nearly every game and averaged in the 70s. And I think he plays the wing so well, he could be one of those great fantasy wings. I mean, think back to an Andrew Gaff. He was probably the last one that really sticks out in my mind, who was a fantasy jet playing on a wing. And yeah, watching Dempsey play, he's just such a jet. I reckon he can keep going and build that average and become more than handy in your side. So yeah, don't sleep on this guy just because he doesn't have DPP. He's only going to get better. He's great to watch. Number 10 is Angus Sheldrick for Sydney. Good old Sheldrick, eh? I feel like this guy's been around forever. He burst onto the scene 2023, his second season, and I remember he hit some pretty big scores. Then didn't get a senior game at all in 2024. But last year we finally saw him in and playing consistently. And he put up some pretty good scores, was pretty good, but then there were the sub-affected games and he ended up just averaging 62. So on paper, there's not a lot about this guy that stands out, but geez, I still think he is, if he can just get that role and keep it, he could be a huge scorer in fantasy. He's always been big on points per minute, and of all the players on this list, he has the highest points per minute for season 2025, and that was 0.88, which isn't huge, but the benchmark of what an amazing PPM score would be is 1. So at 0.88, he's nearly there and the highest on this list. I don't know what they'll do with him. I mean, they got Callum Mills to come back into that midfield, I reckon, this year. And yeah, it's Dean Cox's second season. Yeah, it's hard to predict, but this is a big year, and I think if they give him the go, he's going to be a 80-plus guy. And then down the track, up to the 100. So I'm really bullish on Sheldrick. Just needs to be given another season of opportunity and, see what he can do. I feel like I've been talking about him for so long, but only been a few years. Number 11, I've got Tanner Bruhn for Geelong. Didn't play at all last season, and before that, seasons 23 and 24, he was building nicely at the Cats, averaging in the 70s. He's a low time on ground guy, but really good scorer when he plays. And he just had a few little niggles in those years, a concussion here or there, and he could just never keep that continuity. But he was building nicely, so obviously missed last season. And I'd like to think for his sake he just walks back in, but geez, a bit's changed in that midfield since his last game for Geelong. The Cats have added Bailey Smith, Max Holmes has become a midfielder, and now James Worpel has joined. So there's a few names ahead of him, but I think Bruhn, if he can get into the side, he was building nicely. It might take another year of getting used to the level again, but in the future I think he's going to be a really good fantasy scorer and a good player for the Cats. So a real interesting watch on him this year, but I've got him at 11 just because I was very bullish 12 months ago, and I'm confident if he gets in, he's going to get back to some good scoring. Number 12 is another forgotten man, Will Brodie, who finds himself at Port Adelaide now after leaving Freo. And, he's 27 now. He's getting up there, and this is his third club. So he's a real curious figure, is Will Brodie. When he came across from Gold Coast to Freo, he averaged 95 in that 2022 season, but then only played a handful of games in 2023 and hasn't been seen at the level since. So lots of waffle, but no AFL games in 24 or 25. So he gets over to Port. Now, the reason I've got him on this list and so high is, I feel like Port have probably just got him as a bit of backup insurance. But there's an opportunity for him to play from round one. Ollie Wines is out suspended for the first 2 weeks. And I reckon if they give him a go and he's good, maybe he can just find a spot and play all year. And if he does, and it's in that role, you only have to go back to 2022 and see he's a 95 guy. So, I don't know if he gets to that. But I don't know. He could just be a really smart pickup. And he'll be available for sure. Number 14, Elijah Hewitt at West Coast. It was great to see him play his 20 games last year. He missed the whole 2024 season, averaged 61, had some really nice scores, and I just think it was a great year of development for him, and he can be a real part of that young West Coast midfield that is growing. It's obviously going to be led by Harley Reid. So, I think Hewitt's a pretty handy guy to jump on. I think he's got a pretty good future ahead of him. Number 14 is Stephen Coniglio at the Giants. At the ripe old age of 32, coming off an average of 59. Just played the 9 games in 2025, and I think he was a sub in one of the last ones. But all reports are he's training well and looking fit. And the thing with Coniglio that I think surprised me in the games he played when he came in last year was how much time he had playing in the midfield. I don't think I was alone in thinking he'd be playing more forward, but in the last 6-7 games he had a fair bit centre bounce attendances, and that was with Green and Callaghan, and I think the other main one was probably O'Halloran at the time. So obviously Clayton Oliver's come in, and Cogs is another year older. But I still think he's a great target. We obviously know the heights he got to in his prime, fantasy-wise, but I think if he can split his time between there and forward line, pick up forward status, and be a pretty handy guy, with risk, just with the injuries and that. But there's no sub rule now. I think if he plays, he plays, and I think he can score really well and end up with forward status to finish out his career. Number 15, at the midway point of the rankings, I've got Xavier Dersma from Essendon. Just finished his second season at Essendon after 5 years at Port Adelaide, and I think this guy is just as safe as houses in fantasy. I mean, he's an outside mid. He's a winger that's averaged 79 and 82 in his last 2 years, 25 years old. I don't see a lot changing. I don't necessarily see a change in him, building his average, but I think for his age, an average of in the 80s for the next 4 or 5 years at the worst, I think he's a pretty handy guy. And I think he'd be probably most would have held on to him just for that reason. But if he's there sitting in the pack, pretty safe guy to round out your midfield, I reckon. On to number 16 now, and this is where things really do start to get a bit more speculative. Elliot Yeo for West Coast, 32 years old, missed the entire 2025 season due to injury, but cast your mind back to 2024 and he did average a very respectable 91. Now, last thing I read on him was he was still on somewhat modified duties at training, but he is building into it, and all going well will be playing round one. I'm really interested to see what role he has. I mean, West Coast, those young boys, they need an experienced guy like him, but they do have Jack Graham, and I wonder if they use Yo in the back line as a bit of a commander off half back. We know that's where he was earlier in his career, as more of a key position defender. But if he ends up back there again and averages 85 to 90 and picks up defender status, even just as a 1 year play, I think that could be pretty handy. Number 17 is Ollie Florent, now at Carlton. He's come across from Sydney. And to be honest, it's probably the only reason I've got him on this list is that he's changed clubs and he's got a new home. He's 27. He only averaged a 60 last year, which is well down on what we know he's capable of. But at Carlton, even if he is still on the wing, I can see him getting that average back up to 75. And who knows, he could pick up some half-back duties as well, pick up back defender status. And he does have a high ceiling, can put up a whopper on his day. So who knows, change of club might be enough to just make him relevant again for us. Also at Carlton, number 18, Cooper Lord. Look, he only averaged 60. There was a lot of sub-affected games last year, but I don't know. He looked really good. I liked him. I liked him when Carlton played him on the ball in the guts. He showed a lot, and he's 20 years old. He's lost his forward status, so he's a mid only now. I reckon there's a good chance he's around, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Carlton do with him if they persist with him and give him another run at it, because I think they've got one there. Number 19, Kane McAuliffe for Richmond. Last year was his second season, came into the side in round 9, played the next 5 games, and then I think it was a quad injury and he was out and didn't get back in. But in those 5 games, he averaged 74, played on the ball, and I thought when I watched him, he looked really good. So the only problem for McAuliffe now, entering his 3rd year, is Richmond have just got so many young midfielders now, and they're going to want to have a look at all of them. But I do think McAuliffe is one they should persevere with, and I reckon they will. So I think he's got every chance this year, and I like his fantasy game for sure. Number 20 is Matt Johnson for Freo. He had a pretty good year, got his average up to 70, 71, and the issue with him is, like, he's a fantasy player. Like, he can score, but there just isn't a spot really in that Freo midfield. He had a little bit of opportunity last year, but that Freo midfield is stacked. So Johnson continues to find himself on the outside, on the wing, on the flanks. But he scored 90 plus in 4 games last season. So he's definitely got it in him. And coming into his 4th year, he's played nearly 20 games in every season of his career. So he's been playing. I think he's building nicely. I've got him a bit further down the list this year than last, but I still think there's a fantasy guy in him. It's just It's just, does he ever get onto the inside? But, with Brayshaw, Sarong, Hayden Young, and Luke Jackson, apparently now for some reason, it's getting harder to see. But he's only 22, Johnson, so, I still like him. At number 21 is his Fremantle teammate, Nathan O'Driscoll, 23 years old, plays on the wing. He looked really good at the start of the year, had some really nice scores, and then he had a pretty big injury. I can't recall what it was, but he missed a fair bit of time. Came back in and was okay, but his scoring faded so bad as the season went on, to the point of him being unplayable in your squads. So I'm a bit unsure what direction his career goes, O'Driscoll, in the fantasy sense. I'd like to think after a full pre-season he gets back to the those 80s and can be a bit like Xavier Dersma, who I mentioned earlier. Just a pretty solid 80 guy on the wing, pretty handy. But yeah, we're gonna have to see it, I think, to be sure. But I reckon he's worth a late crack, because he's got it in him. He's got the fantasy stuff in him. It's just, those injuries haven't helped. Number 22, Hugo Garcia at St Kilda. Geez, he was in the news a bit last year, Garcia. I remember, was he the one who was subbed at half-time of a game and Ross Lyon was criticised, and then the next week Garcia won the Rising Star nomination? Something like that. But he's one of those ones who's lost forward status, is a mid only, and I reckon will be overlooked in a lot of leagues. But I do know that I liked what I saw in his good fantasy games last year, and St Kilda, I think there's plenty of opportunity for them. I don't think they've quite locked down on what their best side is going to look like, what their next premiership side is going to look like just yet. And I think Garcia's got an opportunity to get into that midfield still at just 20 years of age, has a good scoring game in him. He's one to take a late fly at. Number 23, Jai Cully for Melbourne. Came across from the Eagles, never really got going for them. Just played a bunch of games later in the year for the D's last year, but looked pretty good. Played on the wing, and he's tough, and I think he's got a pretty big future. And there's opportunities at Melbourne too, like Oliver's gone, Petrarca's gone, Jack Viney's getting older. So I'm not sure if he ends up on the inside, but I think he is someone worth stashing. Number 24, probably got to be last chance saloon with this guy, Elijah Sardis at Essendon, who's, I say last chance, but it's only his fourth year that he's entering this year, but just someone with such a huge, junior fantasy scoring history before he got to the level, just hasn't been able to make it at Essendon. I don't know. I feel like he's much maligned by Essendon fans, and I don't know why. I've always sort of thought he can still make it. It's obviously still time. I know last year he was in the side at the start of the year, and then he broke his hand against Adelaide and played out the game with a broken hand and did all right. And I remember thinking that was pretty tough, and he's got something, this kid, but didn't see much of him for the rest of the season. Essendon have recruited a whole bunch of, young gun mids, and, it's getting harder and harder to see for Sardis, but I still think if he can get in, have a spot in that midfield, that, that fantasy scoring we saw from him as a junior will shine at AFL, and he'll be a pretty good player, pretty good scorer rather, and maybe an okay player. I don't know. Number 25, I've got Sam Berry from Adelaide. Oh, Berry, he's an interesting player. This is a guy who in his second season of AFL averaged, I think, in the 80s, but he actually laid the most tackles in the whole of the AFL for that season. So I thought from then he was destined to be a fantasy star just on tackling power alone. But he spent the next few years in and out of the side, and probably a victim of the sameness of that Adelaide midfield, that one-paced, you think of Matt Crouch, Rory Laird, those types. But last year he got back into the side, Berry, and played pretty much throughout the whole season. Even had a go at sort of tagging at times. But for a guy who, played on the ball, his scoring was just a bit too up and down. I mean, he had a nice patch. Between round 16 and 20, he went over 80 for 4 of the 5 of them, but he's just not a big accumulator of the footy. So if he doesn't lay a big amount of tackles, he just isn't going to score that well. I still have hope. I still think he could be a great player. I just wonder how long he stays in that Crows side if the likes of, Soligo and, Dan Curtin is one that springs to mind. But I just think Berry might find himself on the outer again. I hope I'm wrong, because he's certainly been my boy for a few years, and I'm waiting for the payday. Number 26, I've got Jai Clark from Geelong. Still only 21. That was his 3rd season last year. Took him all year to get into the side. He came in late, but then he ended up playing in all 3 finals. Really high draft pick, who I think he's building nicely. I think I'm not surprised we haven't seen heaps of him at senior level just yet. But I do think the Cats rate him, and as a lot of players probably ahead of him at the minute, but he's still so young, and I just think he's the sort of guy, there's no harm in grabbing him, stashing him, and just seeing what happens in 2026. If he gets his opportunity, like he did last year and played in all their finals, I think it could be a year that he starts to come on, and I think he's going to be a fantasy scorer, just not yet. Number 27, Hunter Clark at St Kilda. Oh, poor old Hunter Clark. Always with the injuries, this guy. He's just never had a real run at it. And I kept him on this list. I mean, it's amazing. He is still only 26. There's still time for him, but hopefully for his sake and St Kilda, he can get his body right. He finished the year pretty well, scored 90, 83 and 91. And I think he had defender status last year. So, yeah, he's a real late flyer. But I don't know. I still feel like there's a fantasy guy in there. It's just, can he stay on the park long enough? And so far the answer to that, unfortunately, has been no, he cannot. Number 28 is Isaac Cumming for Adelaide. Came across from the Giants and averaged 61, which was very underwhelming. I was pretty optimistic he'd fit into the Crows' backline and play off half-back, but in the end, he just played on the wing. And the concern I have for him and his fantasy prospects is he played really well. He was a very important player for the Crows, and he didn't really score. So he's 27. I think he can average much more than low 60s. But I think for him to get up to a really, the heights of what he did at the Giants, he'd need to be playing half-back. And it's not looking like that's the plan for him at the Crows. Number 29 is another Crow, Luke Nankervis, who found himself on the outer. And look, I've really squeezed him into this list because I've heard some really good things about his pre-season and how he's been training. And he's a guy who I think is gonna give his all to get back into the side and have a permanent spot. And he's a guy that plays on the outside, on the wing, but can play half back and be a bit of a distributor and has a bit of a fantasy game about him. So I'm just not prepared to write him off just yet. And then number 30, lucky last, good old Neil Erasmus at Freo. A guy who really, if he was at almost any other club, probably would have broken out in the fantasy world by now. But he is behind a few at the Dockers, and he got his chances, and we saw bits and pieces of him again 2025, even on the ball at times, but more as a half forward, just not enough to keep that forward status. So he's a very hard, certainly someone to hold. But look, he's 22. I think and it's a big if clearly at this point, if he can get on the inside of that Freo midfield, he'll be he'll be a really good scorer. But I really wanted to see him get a trade to another club for him to be on my radar. But look, I squeeze him into the list. He's an old favourite of mine. He's one I've been waiting on for years, and there's still time. This is season 5 for him, and yeah, I'll be watching him closely. So that's 30 done. 30 midfielders I reckon you should be targeting for your redrafts coming up. A few special mentions, some guys that were pretty close to getting on the list. Jack Bowes for Geelong, just purely because the sub rule is gone, so no more unexpected surprises when he's playing okay and then all of a sudden he's a sub. But I don't know. I feel like if he was going to make it as a fantasy player, he would have by now, and he averaged under 60 all up. Campbell Chesser has found himself at Carlton after a couple of years at the Eagles. He's someone I can see turning into a pretty good scorer. Jackson Mead at Port Adelaide. He's 24. I've heard he's spent some time... Well, actually, he spent a bit of time at the end of last year, but I've seen in pre-season a bit more training at half-back in the back line, and with a new coach, maybe new opportunities for him. And Ed Allen at Collingwood, who showed a bit, I reckon, last year. And just being 21, and Collingwood really do need to keep bringing the youth through, could see a bit more from him this season. At the start of the pod, I mentioned there were a handful of names of players who averaged less than 80 last season, so they qualify for the rankings, but I didn't bother ranking them because I'm pretty sure they'll be owned in pretty much all the leagues. And if they're not, I'd have these guys ranked ahead of anyone from the 30 I just mentioned. So who are they? Some pretty recognised names. Levi Ashcroft at Brisbane, averaged 74 in his first year. He's going to be a gun. George Wardlaw for North. He only averaged 68, and he's had a lot of concussions and injury concerns, but he scores when he plays. Harley Reid for West Coast. He averaged 67, but I'm bracing for a pretty big third-year breakout for him. Harvey Langford at Melbourne, averaged 63 in his first year, and there's a lot of talk about him getting more opportunity. Hayden Young for Freo, he averaged 63 from just a handful of games. Xavier Lindsay, another young Melbourne guy, looked really good, averaged 52. And then Jagger Smith at Carlton would have gone number 1 in most redrafts this time last year. Unfortunately, didn't get to see him at the level due to the ACL, but he'll be back. And Josh Smiley at Richmond, who's another guy who just didn't get to debut, but I think for those who've got him, they're going to be pretty happy with what they see when he finally makes his debut. On to the listener questions for this week, and I put the tweet out on X saying send through any questions you've got about the midfield for this year, and got a good response. So thank you everyone who has sent these in. And if you are wanting to get involved, find the X page at FindKeepAFL to get involved and stay in touch with Finders Keepers and everything that's happening with the podcast. First question is from Big Red at Mortarded. Tanner Bruhn off the VFL and won't get his juicy spot back. A year out but fit, does he go behind Worpel? Yeah, so I talked about Bruhn in my rankings, had him pretty high up, so I am very bullish on him. It's a good question though about Worpel and the VFL. I do think there's a chance Bruhn starts off in the VFL and works his way in. But long term, I see him being a part of that Geelong midfield and being a very good scorer. So yeah, I'm optimistic, and yeah, it just might be a bit of a wait, and he might need another 12 months, just to get back to the momentum he had before 2025. At MitchFinn95 asks, who gets my last spot in a 9-keeper league? Will Day, missing half the season and hoping he gets a run at it? Or Bailey Humphrey, knowing it may not be a boom year, but he may find more opportunities the year after? It's a great question. I mean, Will Day, God, for those Will Day owners, so frustrating. And another half of the season gone already. I still think it's Day. I still think you hold Day over Humphrey. The thing with Humphrey is I think you're probably a better chance of drafting him and getting him back than you would be a name like Will Day. And Humphrey, I agree with you. It's probably not going to be this year, and it might be that he does leave the Suns and it's 2027 where we see him play more midfield and start to get the consistent scoring. And yeah, it'd be nice to have both, but I just have Will Day. I just hold on to him. There's just more currency still in his name. At Hawker's Heroes, a great supporter of the podcast. Thanks, mate. He's asking about Josh Ward, and I think you'd be pretty happy, Hawker, that he came in at number 1 on my rankings as the guy to target. So, as I said at the start, very bullish on him. I think this is the year for him to go to that next level, and I think Hawks need him to. At Kayeb 2000, Sam Durham. So again, another play higher. My rankings had him at number 2. Quite a similar sort of scoring guy to what Josh Ward has been. And I think he can go to another level as well in what will be season 6 for him. Yeah, 6 years in now. So yeah, we're going to see it. Daniel Bird at Vulcan Left Hand. Thoughts on Wardlaw? Poor Georgie Wardlaw. He has been in the wars for his young career. I think very highly of him. Very, very highly. I think just needs a bit of luck to stay on the field, and he's going to be a really good scorer and a really good player too. The thing that's really good about Wardlaw at North is, they've got so many excellent young midfielder types, but a lot of them can play in different areas of the field, and Wardlaw to me is just a in and under grunt midfielder. That's his spot. And yeah, I think he's going to be great. He just needs the luck with the body. And yeah, fingers crossed that he gets that this year and he has a real big breakout and rewards those who've been holding him for the last few years. Last question is at Patrick Dan 71167, which is Holmes is where the heart is. Great name. And his is a 2-part question. The first question I can answer quite easily. The second question, I really don't know what you're on about, but we'll get to that. Is Will Ashcroft a top 15 in a keeper league? And what kind of sandwich best represents him? So the first question, is he a top 15? Yeah, absolutely he is. I mean, what an impact he's had in a young career. Already 2 Norm Smith medals, if you don't mind, which obviously doesn't help us in the fantasy world, but it does show this guy is an absolute superstar. And what's he been averaging, in the 90s, 95? I don't think he hasn't even scratched the surface of his potential. So I'd definitely have him in that top 15 for sure. In terms of what type of sandwich he'd be, I guess it'd be a pretty high-end sandwich. Maybe with premium artisanal breads, maybe some specialty proteins, handmade condiments like truffled aioli or fruit-based chutneys. I actually just put high-end sandwich into Google AI, and that's what I got. So hopefully that helps. And with that, we come to the end of this week's edition of Finders Keepers, and hopefully some of those names I've listed today can help you in your upcoming redrafts. Thanks to everyone for sending the questions in, and don't forget you can send your questions in on X at FindKeepAFL. Next week I'll be looking at the ruck line, which has always been a bit of a tricky line to navigate, but it could be an interesting year with the changes to the AFL rules, and we might see a bit of a knock-on effect to the ruckman and their scoring output. So that's going to be even more important than ever to be across that this year. So I look forward to bringing that to you next week. Make sure you check it out. Thanks for listening. And in the meantime, I'm Jordox. This has been Finders Keepers. And until next time, keep on keeping on.